For 70 years, Israel, actually the two southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, were taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar into the land of Babylon, and they were held captive. They weren't their own. Nothing that they owned, supposed, including all their possessions and even themselves. They were even required to bow down to idols and such, and they were held captive. And so when they were returned to their land, and in particular, they made it to Jerusalem, and they found a copy of the law, the Torah, the history of their people. And when they read it, it caused no small stir. And they repented. It says that they gathered together and they assembled to dress themselves in sackcloth, and they fasted, and they put dirt on themselves. Again, I mentioned this in the last video, that they this was a symbolic, and not just symbolic, but they were lowering themselves and humbling themselves before the mighty hand of God. Why? What caused them to come to this place of repentance? Well, I can see by reading that whenever the men of God stood up and read the history and the account of their journeys, they saw how good God was to them. And you can find this in Nehemiah chapter 9, but it was read to them about the goodness and the grace and the mercy and the loving kindness extended to them throughout their history. And even as rebellious as they were, God displayed his goodness to them. Listen to Nehemiah chapter 9, verse number 17. It says, "They refused to listen and obey, and did not remember your wondrous deeds which you had performed among them. So they became stubborn and hardened their necks." They hardened their necks. They stood back and said, "Not me. I'm not doing what you say." And appointed a leader. Now, again, this is talking about the history of their people. And when they came out of Egypt, they had been delivered and given their freedom and were cared for. And they had food and water and clothing that did not wear out, given to them. God extended goodness after goodness after goodness. And it says they hardened their necks and they became stubborn and stiff-necked. And they appointed a leader for themselves to return to their slavery in Egypt. But you are a God of forgiveness and graciousness and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in loving kindness or goodness. And you did not forsake them, even when they made for themselves a molded calf and said, "This is your God who brought you up from Egypt," and committed great blasphemies. Does that not sound like Romans chapter 1 about where we have come to, as a society? "Yet you, in your great compassion, did not forsake them in the wilderness." Verse 20 says, this is Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 20 says, "You gave them your good spirit to instruct them." Boy, this sounds like us, don't it? It sounds like our history. You, verse 21 says, you sustain them. These are the good things he gave them, even though they were rebellious. Verse 23 says, you increase their children, cause them to be productive. He says, verse 25, they delighted themselves in your great goodness. Verse 26 says, but they became disobedient and rebelled against you and cast your law, right and wrong, behind their backs. They killed your prophets and worked blasphemies. Even though they done that, listen to what verse 31 says. But in your great compassion you did not make an end of them, nor forsake them, for you are a gracious and compassionate God. Can you see how people of God have responded to God even while he was being good to them? That's easy to see. Verse 35 says, with your great goodness which you gave them, with the broad and rich land which you set before them, they did not serve you or turn from their evil deeds. This is the sinner's response to God in his goodness. You know, it was 700 years of rebellion before God dispersed the 10 northern tribes in judgment. It was 800 years before the Babylonian captivity of Judah and Benjamin, the southern kingdom. You know, this is the story of a rebellious, impenitent, sinful people, disobedient in the face of constant goodness lavished on them. What's our story? You know, you say, well, that was them, and we don't do like that. We're not like them. You know, the Pharisees said that. And Jesus said, no, you prove that you're just like your fathers by your actions. So what's our story? That was Israel's story. What's ours? I mean, they had God's law written on stone and documented and passed down generation to generation from Moses to the prophets and so on. What do we have? What do we have? Well, we're going to continue this on what we have, and we're going to be careful. We don't want to compare ourselves among ourselves, because when we do, we're not wise. But you say, well, you're comparing. I'm merely pointing out to you that we are no different. So, but take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. We'll come back to this.